I am reading from a series of short essays I have written of accumulated understanding over a period of 30 years. Whilst reading or listening to these essays, it is advised that one's attention is not being distracted by other means, i.e. driving a car or such like. There are many different ways that what I am saying here can be said. This is the way that came to me. What is said in these essays is a formula, and not a prerequisite for having or acquiring a still mind. I have found it a route I have seemingly taken. Stillness came first. The rest seemed to follow. So, in essence, these essays have their foundation 30 years back in a life story. The story is about doing nothing, and out of that nothing, reality appears as all of one's clear perception, or just plain clarity. As one accepts life experience as one's own, the experiencer is born, and therefore a story one tells and seems to live by. Everyone seems to have a story to tell that one calls one's own life story, unaware that the story is not one's true self, and as the story comes to a close, where one seems to die, are then put in a box and disposed of in whatever means, with a stone at one's head telling of that story, thereby missing the whole point of being, which is to wake up from one's story to one's true nature, which by virtue of life is to recognize that one true life that one is. In this dialogue it is pointed out a simple journey, not always easy, but simple. The thinking mind has a tendency to make simple complicated. Whomever one identifies as is irrelevant. This writing is not about personal identification. It is about one's true nature, spirit, life, being, identifying as itself through the character one calls oneself. As one's perception of a personal sense of self dissolves over time, it seems, one seems to give less power to bad as well as good, and as a consequence, in the without, one seems to be more neutral. From this perspective, one is more effective in positive change out there in the relative scenery. As this forms the bedrock, the light for one's others to follow. In the following there seems a repeating of the same words over and over, not to instill any sense of indoctrination, but to show and state a fact that has eluded mankind for millennia. Conscious awareness, God, is all there is. There is only conscious awareness, God, regardless of appearances. Jesus stated something like, "Judge not, lest ye be judged." Judge not by appearance, but judge by the seeing of the eye. Yet man judges by the seeing of the optical eye. To what he thinks he sees with dualistic vision is correct, right as opposed to wrong. Then man suffers from that judgment. I use the word God many times in this reference, synonymous with conscious awareness. God in these terms has no affiliation with religions or dimensional perceptions of good or bad. Imagine, if you will, seeing phenomenal reality, that which includes dimension, frequency, and all that forms out of the creative sense of being, as a universal cosmic movie, where all that plays out is subject to the laws of this phenomenal reality. Now see oneself as witness to this movie, sitting in an audience, sometimes participating as one identifies as the character in the movie, but knowing one is not that character, but with a sense of objectivity untouched. The code, the password, has been written into scriptures through the ages by seers, or seers, one that is able to see and understand spiritually in an absolute sense from a point of pure awareness. The password is I, the I of being, written into one's soul, one's own being. This writing is to show a process, a mechanism of how to gently encourage one's mind to a still, quiet point where one may perceive from, uncluttered by constant chattering dialogue that seems unabated, and would happily, like a dog running untethered, lead its master through the brambles and swamps of disillusion. Under the layers of life conditioning, one may call oneself, the one that one thinks is oneself, the one that thinks it is the master, lays the stillness of the true master, the one that knows, the only one that has always been awake in constant eternal love, the I of one's being. In this stillness one knows complete safety and security, total satisfaction, a love unbound, omnipresent and timeless in nature. Love knows only itself, and as master it guides oneself gently through the mesmeric landscape of time-space. Imagine one sitting in an old-style auditorium or cinema. The curtains covering the screen are closed. The lights are dim, just bright enough so as one may find their seat. As everyone is seated, there is an air of anticipation, as one is waiting for the movie to start. Then, at the back of the auditorium, an opening appears, as a bright light shines from a projector. The curtains open and the screen is illuminated from the light of the projector. As the directed light shines on the screen, images of the mind start to appear on the screen. These images are still shots recorded into frames. The frames of the still shots pass over the light projected at a speed that nearly resonates with the speed the human mind accepts as relative motion. This gives a sense that what one is watching on the screen is real. Is there any real life in Donald Duck or Mickey Mouse as they play their games and talk of their concerns? Imagine a movie is playing. The characters in the movie remind oneself of a scene in one's own life, to the degree that one identifies with a specific character from the movie. And now, as one identifies with the character, one is sensing, feeling, experiencing oneself in the movie one is watching. Is this not the purpose of the movie industry? To get the observer of the movie so entrapped in the movie, one thinks that one is the part of that movie. Is not predictive programming done by seeding thoughts into the observer's conditioned mind? by watching and accepting the programming as true? Do not the powers that were instill a sense of future that is necessary for a predicted outcome? The light from the projector has not changed. It is and always will be the light. That is its nature, to shine light. It is necessary for it to be the light, just by virtue of its nature, so as to illumine the images on the screen of awareness. In the case of sitting in the auditorium, the screen in front of oneself, one's eyes and brain act as a video camera recording all the images that pass by on the mirror screen of awareness's one's mind. Just as the analogy of sitting in the auditorium. The appearance is only the evidence of recorded shots seen by the movie maker, called the human mind. These images can and do change their influence upon oneself. What does not change is the light of awareness that is constant. This essay covers many different aspects to help clear a way to self-healing by doing absolutely nothing. One may use to uncover one's inner self. It is not necessary to read the essay, but helpful. One may even go straight to self-healing by doing absolutely nothing and work from there. Either way, it is up to oneself. Enjoy. So what is the point of this essay? The system keeps one interested just long enough until one stops believing in it. Ascending through dimensions is BS, science created to keep oneself in a mindset of striving towards a better future, a better life. One is more inclined to wake from a nightmare than of a good dream. The point is, clarity of self frees oneself from the bondage of the thinking human mind that argues right from wrong, good from bad, the opposite conflictions of likes and dislikes. It allows one to feel at ease with one's world out there. At the same time, one is attentive to one's needs and the needs of one's others as the natural course of one's being. When one's optical vision seems impaired, one would likely do something about it, if one knew. If over time one's vision deteriorated, so as one was under the assumption that the way one was visioning was the same as when one knew it to be good, would one readily do anything about it, even if it was pointed out to oneself? But in actuality, what one now assumed as normal or good was actually a state of depression. Like a frog in boiling water, by the time the frog has realised the water was too hot to do anything about it, the frog had met its maker. The personal mind can find itself in a hole so deep it is unable to see daylight. The mind may say, "I'm going to punish you," so it gives oneself a heart attack or a nervous breakdown, only to find that the mind has itself sabotaged itself and shuts itself down, where one is left in a state of limbo, not knowing what the fuck to do. Why now? Love is normal. It is one's natural state of being. Fear is a state of not being. When one is living from a clear perspective, one's choices are simpler. The only one that wants to wake up is the one that thinks they're asleep. By ignoring spirit, awareness, God, one seems to have an endless path of purpose. The realization of one's true identity wipes out any sense of karma. The embodiment of life, known to itself, dispels any sense of belief. The lion who thought he was a sheep. There was a lion that grew up in a flock of sheep, and so he had no consciousness that he was a lion. He didn't know he was a lion. He would bleat like a sheep, he'd eat grass like a sheep. One day they were wandering at the edge of the big jungle where a mighty lion let out a big roar and leapt out of the forest and right into the middle of the flock. All the sheep scattered and ran away. Imagine the surprise of the jungle lion. He saw this other lion there among the sheep. So he gave chase. He got hold of him. And there was this lion cringing in front of the king of the jungle. And the jungle lion said to him, "What are you doing here?" And the other lion said, "Have mercy on me. Don't eat me. Have mercy on me." But the king of the forest dragged him away, saying, "Come on with me." He took him to the lake, and he said, "Look." So the lion, who thought he was a sheep, looked, and for the first time he saw his reflection. He saw his image. Then he looked at the jungle lion, and he looked at the water again, and he let out a mighty roar. He was never a sheep again. It took only a minute. Anonymous. There is no such thing as ascension. Going on. There is a revealing happening, but there are no people going to live in higher dimensions on this earth plane. That is dreaming, that a dreamer can ascend, go upwards in understanding. Does one see the trick? How can awareness ascend? It's a misdirection of the personal mind, believing it has substance, life, awareness of its own. A dream state. The revealing is of what has always been. It appears as an expansion of one's conscious awareness, or what one assumes as one deems one's own state of being. But in actuality is, for the use of better words, a mist understanding. Understanding shrouded in the mist of mental fog. One's precious intellect that has served as one's sense of contact with reality. But in truth, the best the intellect could come up with is a shadow of the real, an illusory misperception, seen through a mist of mental misrepresentation called the personal sense of self. The individual is as bond-free as awareness. The individual is the embodiment of awareness, God, looking through a seeming sense of personal self. Everyone wants out. We all go about it in our own different ways. The funniest thing about this is, it is not desirable to lose that which one has grown accustomed to believing is true about oneself, one's environment, or one's reality. Unfortunately, seemingly, man has awoken to a degree where the illusion of life has grown tiresome and so destructive one is more inclined to want to wake from a bad dream as opposed to a good dream. I am sure it has become apparent that especially over the past 2 years, we as a collective whole have been taken for a ride by the old world. For many, this salient fact has been apparent for far longer. I am a simple man with a simple understanding of the world. Like most of my others out there, the only place I know equality truly exists is in the spirit, and this is our common bond. The truth being, for those that have an open mind and understand that the world around them just does not seem right, they have felt within their hearts and minds that this is not the way reality should be, albeit the way it seems to be. History, his story, has painted a picture of progression through a means of survival of the fittest, of good versus evil, with good in the form of heroic and not so heroic figures, triumphing over evil tyrants as far back as one cares to look. On the surface, man's progression has been shown to see people of the past to be less civilized than those of today. Yet, we collectively have been expected to accept war, famine, hard times as a normal consequence of this progression. In hindsight of this knowledge, has mankind progressed or regressed? How much knowledge has been hidden from the masses to the detriment of their well-being, all in the name of sacrifice? Those that have cared to look and delve into this question of what is life all about usually end up on the fringes of society, labelled as heretics by their peers, or convenient labelled as conspiracy theorists, a term coined by present-day intelligence operatives. Intelligence operatives have been around since the dawn of time, basically some oligarch's henchmen. Let us assume, and later let us take that assumption from a theoretical perspective and understand it in a factual context, that man has had the true nature of himself hidden, not just hidden in secrecy, but hidden in the most obvious place, hidden in plain sight. Once upon a time in his history, waking up was done in a cave, an ashram, or solitude. Way back in the past, centuries up until modern day, people would venture to meet great gurus, to attain a certain enlightenment, to bring back and spread to the people of their land. The 60s and 70s, as much as fun as it was for some, was a psyop performed by the powers that were, to corral that knowledge brought back and shape it in mysticism and conspiracy, therefore burying its potential amongst only a few. But light, truth, spirit has its own way of seeping out, and now waking up is done in the boiler house, here in the cities, the towns and the villages, with regular folk, be they a barmaid or a bin man, a rich man or a robber, a clerk or a caretaker. Light does not care which flower it shines on. Light loves itself unconditionally. There is only one awareness reading here now. As in the boy in the story, never-ending story, the boy reading the story was the same one creating Fantasia, one's world. There seems to be many states, dimensions and stages, levels of consciousness, of waking up. Knowing oneself, one's true identity, is the last wake-up. The word seems or seemingly is used many times when referring to a relative state of reality. Whilst one seems to be in a certain state of being, whichever that may seem to be, it seems to be real, and for all intents and purposes it is real, and one lives according to that realness, habitually through familiarity with that state. But if and when that sense of reality gets pulled into question, for whatever reason, it may seem to get crushed under conflicting evidence. That reality seems to disappear as one wakes from the belief that it was even real. One can see it only seemed to be real. If something is real, it is eternal. What is unreal disappears, for there was never any reality to it. This writing is not about the past or a future of mankind. This book is about now, a timeless point that seems to elude the unconscious recognition of man. Jesus said, "You want the loaves and fishes, yet I will show you what produced those loaves and fishes." I can only say I for myself. I cannot say I for another. The other can say I for themselves, but not for the I of me. So is it not an assumption that the other one credited the embodiment of life is an accepted assumption? That body has life of its own, when in truth I can only make that judgment for myself, not another. If I were to be honest, from the above perspective one can safely explore where life is, as now, out there seems arguably debatable as a true reality and more inclined to be a construct of the mind. That aside for a moment, in the context of this writing, out there is understood as an assumption of the conditioned mind. One has never got into the body of another out there to prove this point one way or another. An impossibility, I imagine. The main context of this writing is not to prove or disprove any specific theory or fact of reality, but merely to show one how to bring oneself to a point where they may see their world from a perspective unclouded by mesmeric suggestions, which may seem contrary to what one innately knows as true. Awakening to one's true identity, losing a conditioned sense of self, may sound a daunting task. That is, even if one dared to go there. But the revelation is something else. One is free to live without the weight of when, how, what if, fear, etc. It is a fearless state in one's attitude. Essentially, one lives the same as one has always done, but the one doing it is not a personal sense of a fear-laden sense of self-lack. One finds a peace that doing for another is like doing for oneself. One will not do for another what one will not do for oneself, as the eye of that other is the same eye of oneself. The correct use of words in context of truth versus reality. Duality. Duality is a state of choice, confusion. Singleness is a state of knowing. Let the awareness that is living oneself fill in the details, the blanks, and read between the lines. If the intellect gets in there, the thinking mind, it will take oneself off on all sorts of distractions. I'm no linguist, but it has always confused me why people get so pissed off if one were to use words in a correct manner. This showed me that language is more or less an acceptance of the normalization of social construct implemented by the powers that were, regardless of whether it is good for people in society using the given language. The confusion the state has deliberately created by using the same words as the populace as a whole, in a manner so totally opposite to what people understand as sane. The words political correctness come to mind. A simple word like good means what it says. Good. Not a shade of good. Good. Yet, from somewhere way back, the word bad got introduced. So now there is a whole range of different shades between the words good and bad. Consequently, good is no longer good, but somewhere on the way to bad. Does one imagine that this was a normal course of events, or perhaps a sense of ignorance was deliberately seeded into the minds of man, with the intent to steer man away from the true intent of words used in a particular language? Suggestion is the root of hypnosis. A suggestion that is accepted as true seems to become a normal state of affairs, whether it be true or not. It is believed to be true, but believing something does not make that belief true. Ponder on that statement for a moment. Older scripts are not easily read by common day man unless one is specialised in a specific field of inquiry. Yet the scripts of old hold a sense of timelessness and clarity in them of what was being spoken of, something of a rarity in the present time. Ralph Waldo Emerson and scholars of his era come to mind. Here is a way to familiarise one who may read these essays with an absolute understanding of one's true use of words that points to a single sense of the use of these words used here. In this writing, one would find it best not to analyse words too much. Question, yes, but just accept the way the words are being used. Essentially, one wants to know the truth of the matter. Otherwise, one feels something is still missing. And by this, in acceptance, comes a deeper understanding that steps out of the normalized parlance. For example, awareness is an absolute use of the word, means a complete, omnipresent awareness. There is nothing geographical about words use, as in time-space. Omnipresent awareness is a state of being that precludes any sense of time-space. In fact, awareness understands nothing of the thinking mind. Yet, one may operate superbly well as a fully functioning member of a society. In fact, the clarity one operates from far surpasses any need to know how the cogs work, as the presence that lives oneself always knows what is to be done with no prior knowledge of the situation at hand. That being said, one is still subject to the same shite as the next person, yet the shite don't stick. More often than not, one totally avoids shite, just by trusting the love that lives oneself. In this trust, one sees the shite from a very different perspective. There is no attachment and no vested interest. Trust and love are one and the same. One cannot trust if one does not love, and one cannot love if one does not trust. Trust and love are like two hands of the same body. Trust or love what? The very life that is living oneself. This is a gentle process, slow and subtle, unnoticeable, like watching the tide change when one is way out in the ocean. One does not notice the movement of the water. The words awareness, consciousness, love, being, spirit, Brahman, Krishna, divine, truth, perfection, omnipresence, omnicaritas, omniscience, omniaction, etc. are all synonymous terms. As in divine presence, there is no sense of separation of these words as to what they truly mean, which is far beyond what the human mind could imagine in its wildest dreams. So how would it be if our children were taught from the get-go, through our educational systems, how to use these words in common day parlance? Would one know heaven on earth? The devil, the thinking mind, has always been in the details, a perversion of communication. Language is a common denominator in communication, and has been used from the get-go in some form or another. How any specific language is accepted in a society or community seems to come from a common agreement as to how that language is used, bearing in mind that the powers that were know this and have used this to their advantage and to the detriment of mankind as a whole. Language has been bastardized and perverted to its present day usage. The altered state of consciousness that is generally called normal, sane, whereby there seems people, others, identifying as personalized human beings and not individual beings, is a seeming self-induced sense of hypnosis, seemingly happening through the continuous replay of spells believed as true. This occurs when one repeats words initially learnt through spelling. The sentences that make up a sense of past and future through the vocabulary used. Hence, the spell seems to create what the mind interprets, seemingly appearing as a self-induced state of reality. That being said, I recall walking into a bookshop in Leicester Square, London, way back in the early 90s with my 2 children. I felt like a kid in a candy store as I looked around. Every subject of life and beyond. I went to this shop many times over the years through my inquiries into my search for the answers to life. I bought many books there, but strangely, every time I walked into Watkins, one particular section caught my eye, one that enveloped my whole life later down the road. Suffice it to say, I almost always knew what book I was looking for, but have since those days wondered how life would have taken from these shelves of this one section that has since been the bedrock to my life as it is now. It is a section on absolute reality. I guess at the time I unconsciously avoided it, maybe deep down knowing the ramifications of letting loose this one choice that scared the shit out of me. There is a common understanding of words laid out by society as a whole. Then there is a language using those same words, but in a context 180 degrees in opposition, dualistic in nature. And this applies to not just CV land language, but absolute versus reality terminology. Words as we seem to use them in everyday parlance seem to refer to opposite poles, or at least are used in context to cause and effect. By this I mean our language seems to give sway to the acceptance that the world is understood in terms of duality. In absolute terms, there are no opposites. The beauty of this is, life seems to be uncomplicated. As one may ask, are the trees moving of their own, or is the wind blowing the trees? Then is one moving one's body, or is spirit the mover? Good is good. Would good be good if it had anything less of good in it? It would be something else, but not good. One who understands affirmations knows the absolute conviction one must have to reap the benefits of positive thought. But using absolute words goes way beyond the thought processes of the personal human mind. The absolute language precludes any sense of duality. It will seem to rewrite one's hardwiring. Essentially, by stating fact and holding to fact, one is asserting a finished, complete, whole, perfect state of being. It is advised to only see words in an absolute manner whilst one is contemplating truth, until that truth seems one's daily mode of living. Remember, one still has to articulate a world out there where insanity is sane and sanity is insanity. The story began with birth. A baby was born into time-space. Its parents indoctrinated the baby in the best way they knew how. They gave their baby love, affection and care. for the most part, from a conditioned state of being. But the one thing that is never a conditioned state is one's innate love for one's child. This is the closest one will ever know to absolute unconditioned love. A most important point to bear in mind here is, for generations to way back, when as humans we all have, for the most part, followed the same indoctrination through our senses. So from the get-go, little baby is taught how to negotiate his or her world through an accepted way that has been handed down as being normal. Little child now is taught how to use its brain via its senses and to relate them in context. There are governmental guidelines set out in society on how this should be done. Mind control goes way further than MK Ultra. Social engineering is a large part of how society is formed by the controllers. One is not allowed to escape the plantation. If there are signs of this, one gets classed as insane and locked away so as not to infect the other members of the plantation. Translated, the insane run our world, and only insanity is acceptable. Power grab. Sanity is deemed as insanity. Insanity is deemed as sanity. So, little children grow up into adults believing that they are sane, and so the cycle of life revolves around thinking one is sane. It gets better. Thinking is the acceptable norm, and do you imagine that our governments would allow us to know otherwise? Being taught that the world out there is to provide one's sustenance, and also accept that the world out there has the ability to deny one's sustenance. Two sides of the same coin. By accepting this dualistic conditioning through a dualistic understanding of language, one naturally abides by it as an accepted means of functioning in an insane, accepted as sane, society laid out by the powers that were, via social engineering. Do you see the scam? Anyone that has been witness to the pandemic, scamdemic, and has been awake to a scam realises that the powers that were have never had one's best interests at heart. One may reason that, no, this could not be so. Well, Satan, a metaphor for ignorance, ignoring oneself, will use God's good ways and not give a shit who falls by the wayside. Where is one's trust? Is it in Satan, duality, good or bad, ignorance? Or is it in life, the very I being the I, the embodiment of God? Jesus said, but no one took any notice, I and the Father, God, are one and the same. There is only one life, infinitely expressed through the embodiment of mankind, albeit looking through the conditioning of the human mind. As Matty in the book of Matthew said, one sees his world like looking through a glass darkly, the conditioned mental personalized mind. Correct usage of the mind, correctly understood, is that the mind is a tool used by God, awareness, oneself, the awareness that is the one that one has right now. Only one tends to assume that the conditioned mind is who and what one is, and belongs to one's personal self. You're never going to take away my precious mind. I've vested my whole life in this mind. And John the Baptist said, one must lose one's life to gain life. By losing one's personal sense of self, one finds one's true sense of self present right here, right now. So now, are things out there? Is sustenance to be gained from out there? Or is sustenance now seen as innate within oneself, the awareness being the very I that I am? Sustenance may appear to come through another, but who or what guides the hand of the other? Does one see the wind or just its effects? Who now owes me? Who is indebted to me? Is it God? My neighbour? The government? Am I owed freedom from out there? By who? When? God awareness is the only life, the only giver. Yes, it may appear that another out there gives oneself something, but in essence it is God awareness giving through that other. Now one is looking at forgiving the indebtedness that one has lain burden on those others out there. For whilst holding another responsible for one's own short-sightedness, one has mistakenly held that other in debt whilst being in total denial of oneself, God, awareness, where all things are complete and present right now. Creation. The creation has already been perceived and conceived as a reality. All the human mind seems to do is prove what already is. The creation is one manifesting the invisible idea in one's consciousness. The manifestation appears solid in its vibratory state relative to where it is being seen from. If one were to take a non-digital old-style camera and have the speed of the shutter out of sync with the picture one was taking, i.e. a bird hovering, but the speed of the shutter was set too slow, one would not see the bird on the end product. Was the bird there or not? My eyes saw it. When the mind is still, quiescent, reality is seen as its true wonder, as there is no shutter speed interference from the personal, low vibratory thinking mind. There is nothing being created. That is a story told by idiots, that the powers that were instilled in culture from way back. The creation theory goes hand in hand with the theory of relativity. Why do you imagine Einstein's final words were, "After I die, I want to be reincarnated back as a plumber"? Read Einstein's spiritual quotes and letters. He knew the shit he was feeding academia was a dead end, whilst at the same time Tesla was giving away free energy. Free energy in a world that is creating? The two do not go hand in hand. What happened to Tesla? They buried him. Relativity and creation were lies told to the masses to hypnotize them into servitude. The so-called creation has already been created, finished, done, conceived and perceived in the awareness of reality. Now, the only moment that truly exists, as an invisible perfect idea, albeit mentally perceived through a hypnotic conditioned sense of reality one calls one's personal thinking mind. As the seasons roll around, giving a sense of birth, death and regeneration, so does man's plight revolve around the spiral of karma. What if one were told there is no karma, there is no birth and death, because the two go together like two sides of the same coin? That there is no time or space or relativity, what then? It's a challenge to stand alone, with their back against the wall, but also knows that standing allows a state of fearlessness to surface that says, this shit has no power over me, and to think that once I was scared shitless over this BS. As the mist perception that fell over the earth in Genesis, edited by the powers that were, seemed to become apparent to people as a forgetting of their identity. Story after story has been written to keep the masses in ignorance, that in the mist of truth never descended. That was just a lie told by idiots.